Good day, Ma'am Figueroa, and to my classmates. I am Sandra May Laure, and since my two group mates were all done sharing their parts, I would be discussing the last two sections, which are the advantages and disadvantages of community language learning, and lastly, the implications of the approach to language teaching in the Philippines. But before that, I would also like to give a brief description of community language learning as a method in language teaching. So, community language learning is a communicative method developed by Quran, which resembles a counseling learning system. According to Quran 1976, it aims to build a counselor-client relationship between the teachers and the students. This method enables students to speak freely about what they wish to learn. It also makes students more responsible and it eliminates their anxieties towards learning, which leads to more effective teaching. Quran believed that a way to deal with the fears of students is for teachers to become language counselors. Moreover, CLL is a language teaching method in which students work together to develop what aspect of a language which they would like to learn. Also, based on counseling approach in which the teacher acts as a counselor and a paraphraser, while the learner is seen as a client and collaborator. So we can think like a teacher as a counselor, students as a client, learning as counseling. And as this is called a community language learning method, you'd really feel that you belong to a community where you feel heard, listened to, comforted, motivated, and guided. In this approach, educators want to teach their learners to use language communicatively, learn on their own, take responsibility, and reflect on their learning experiences. Alright, let's get to the point as I will now discuss with you what are the advantages and disadvantages of community language learning or CLL. And I'll go first with the advantages. And the first one listed in here is community language learning works well with lower level students who are struggling in spoken English. We know that most of the time, students' progress and proficiency are judged based on their oral participation in the classroom. Sometimes, student anxieties and fears stand as an obstacle in front of the learning progress, especially when talking about lower level students, those who are shy, timid, and has low self-esteem. They find it difficult to speak, especially in a conventional classroom, and they struggle to find the appropriate vocabulary item when trying to speak in English. Fortunately, there's community language learning, which increases students' participation in classroom conversation. It offers a lot of communicative and collaborative activities which are student-centered. So in this sense, students who find it hard to speak the language are given the chance to enhance their speaking skills and improve their overall performance through speaking it out, while teachers listen to them and give feedback afterwards. The second one is CLL lowers students' anxiety and overcome threatening affective filters. Just as I have mentioned, CLL is best for reducing students' anxieties. We know that anxiety is the affective factor that most prevalently obstructs the learning process. As students, we are usually reluctant to participate orally because of fear and worry. We are conscious how our classmates and teachers would react to our answers. Then we start doubting ourselves if we have the same understanding as others did and whether our answers were correct. So to avoid that, all we did is to just stay quiet and sit in our seats, even if we had many ideas in our mind. In that way, we already express fear and anxiety over speaking more than any other language skill. That's why teachers find themselves seeking for new strategies and techniques to get their students to speak in the foreign language and promote communication in the classroom. Young 1990 stated that one of the viral ways to reduce students' anxieties concerning speaking is through voluntary responses, group work, and and accepting students' contributions. And that is how actually CLL works. It enables teachers to refocus on the learner while they briskly react positively to working in a community. Another great thing is that students are also exposed to peer correction, and by working together, they overcome their fear of speaking and gain the confidence to participate in oral conversation. Next is CLL creates a warm, sympathetic, and trusting relationship between the teacher and learners. As CLL is a counseling approach, it creates a close relationship between the teacher and learners. We know that active and empathetic listening is essential to understanding. The teacher has to be a good listener. When a teacher is an understanding and considerate person, students feel secure and can be open and non-defensive in learning. Within this rapport, students' anxieties may disappear and effective learning can take place. But more than that, a good relationship between teachers and learners will be built and developed. Hence, they feel as if they were comforted and heard. Then they become open to their teachers in sharing what parts they struggle in, and from that they go trust in their teachers. And the fourth one is CLL trains students to become independent. In CLL approach, learners are given opportunities to put their language skills to practice in real life situations and to work with other students. And in that sense, they can feel so comfortable and relaxed in doing learning activities. Um, it develops one's confidence and effectiveness as a learner. And I do believe that working together actually encourages students to learn more and makes them strive for independence. Next in the list is teachers, or what we call as counselors in this approach, allow learners to determine the types of conversation and to analyze the language inductively. So, CLL is a method that is based on English for communication and is extremely learner focused. It encourages students to work together to develop what skill of a language they would like to learn. Since the types of learning and teaching activities in this approach involves translation, group work, recording, transcription, analysis, reflection and observation, listening, and free conversation, students are given a lot more opportunities to learn more about the language and be able to apply them in real life conversation. Another is CLL is an attempt to overcome the threatening affective factors in EFL and ESL. ESL and EFL learners actually encounter speaking difficulties, and one of them is the use of their mother tongue. Al Hosni 2014 revealed in her study that the majority of the students in EFL classes speak the same language, so they tend to communicate with each other using their mother tongue, which they use outside the classroom. So they transfer their own cultural patterns into the target language whenever they want to use it, which is a result of target language vocabulary lacks. And last but not the least, the student-centered nature of this method can provide extrinsic motivation and capitalize on intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation helps students become driven and competitive, while intrinsic motivation supports seeking knowledge for its own sake. Ultimately, fostering both types of motivation helps students develop good study habits and an investment in learning. If we are to put this in the CLL approach, we could attest to it since CLL is a student-centered approach which primarily puts the focus of language learning and teaching to the students. Students for sure attend classes and study to learn and explore. These reasons are enough to say that students feel motivated for self-development and of course to improve their speaking and communication skills, which are highly necessary in this globalized world. Also, CLL is time-consuming to carry out. As CLL uses a counseling approach in language teaching, The teaching process takes longer than usual. It consumes a lot of time as it relies largely on the counselor's translation. And just like a literal counseling session, there are instances that students may stutter or take the time to open up his or her concerns to the teacher, making this method a lot more time consuming. Another is that translation is an intricate and difficult task. So the success of the method relies largely on the translation expertise of the counselor. Just as I was saying, the success of the CLL approach relies largely on the translation of the teacher. So the teacher should also be an expert counselor. Translation is really a complicated task as it requires teachers to elaborate and explain every detail of the target language so students would be able to grasp the discussion. Though teachers are expected to be professed in the field of translation, in reality, there are actually teachers who also struggle a bit on translating, especially given that there are students who are shy, timid, and not confident in sharing and opening up with the teacher. Another disadvantage of this approach is that the counselor or the teacher can become too non-directive, so students often need directions. Teacher identifies and defines the problematic situation. They are friendly with the counselees and encourages free expression of feelings regarding the problem of the individual. They accepts and recognizes the positive as well as negative feelings regarding the issue. Yet, the counselor does not give judgments on the information being put forth by the client or by the students and avoids offering advices or directions. Teachers assume that their students are already responsible and thoughtful, yet they don't know that there are still students who need to be given advice and directions too on what they're going to do. As a result, students lose track and worse, the whole process can be considered of no use. Finally, this method relies completely on inductive learning. So another problem with CLL is its reliance upon an inductive strategy of learning. Inductive learning in the early stage of language learning is not effective unless successful. How? It involves the learners detecting or noticing patterns and working out a rule for themselves before they practice the language. Again, it puts the responsibility on the learners themselves. But not all students are intelligent enough to self-comprehend every topic as they need guidance and the teacher's further explanation to grasp the idea. So moving on to the implications of community language learning as an approach to language teaching in the Philippines, I actually have listed 6 here. The first one says, learning is not viewed as an individual accomplishment but as something that is achieved collaboratively. Thus, students, just like a community, grow trust with each other and help one another to develop and improve in terms of language. We know that CLL is a collaborative learning method and great because it makes the students depend on each other in their pursuit of knowledge and makes the learning process more meaningful and interesting. So when students are learning in a group, they will not feel alone and isolated from the rest. When students are working in groups, they will be a part of a community whereby everyone will lend support to one another. This will provide the academic and social support in learning that the students need. When students of different performance levels cooperate with each other in working towards achieving a desired goal, the students are not merely accountable for their own learning process, but are also responsible for their peers' learning process as well. In other words, success will breed more success. The learning experience can be further enriched when the teaching method which is used takes into account the interest and motivation of the learners. Student motivation will be heightened as a result of collaborative learning. This is because the students will feel in charge and empowered in terms of their own learning process. More so, they will not just develop connections with their classmates, but they will also grow trust and build a strong relationship with their teachers. This results to a more successful and progressive learning experience using community language learning approach. Next is that I have found that the study of FADE 2016 concludes that community language learning, or CLL, is effective in improving students' speaking skills. Hence, the researcher recommends English teachers to use CLL in their classrooms to enhance the students' speaking abilities. Because we know that using the collaborative and pre-correction activities, students are actually given the opportunities to improve their speaking and oral proficiency. In the same sense, Pospitasari 2011 stated that CLL method is an effective technique to improve the student's ability in speaking for transactional conversation. Moreover, Najaraj 2009 study stated that CLL is most responsive of the methods, which is reviewed in terms of its sensitivity to learn communication skills, especially speaking. It should be noted, however, that this communicative intent is constrained by the number and knowledge of fellow learners. A learner's desire to understand or express technical terms used in aeronautical engineering is unlikely to receive adequate response in the CLL class. Community language learning places unusual demands on language teachers. They must be highly proficient and sensitive to nuance in both L1 and L2. They must be familiar with and sympathetic to the role of counselors in psychological counseling. They must resist the pressure to teach in the traditional senses. As one CLL teacher notes, I had to relax completely and to exclude my own will to produce something myself. I had to exclude any function of forming or formulating something within me, not trying to do something. This is cited in Quran 1976. Another implication is that CLL can build a relationship among students in a trusting relationship. I also have mentioned this all over my discussion. Any debilitating anxiety that students feel can be reduced. So, community language learning is best for reducing anxiety from students in oral participation. This is where the interrelation of reduced anxiety from the learners and built relationship among students and trust between learners and teachers happens. So, in that sense, community language learning is considered to be an effective approach in the aspect of language teaching, as it increases the speaking proficiency of the students through collaborative tasks and peer assignments. And finally, though I have mentioned this as one of the disadvantages of community language learning, this is also a part of the implications of CLL. So CLL has reliance upon an inductive strategy of learning which doesn't consider the students' individual differences. So we know that CLL uses a student-centered approach in language teaching. So it is important that teachers actually consider the students' individual differences. And in that matter, teachers should respond to the needs and interests of the learners regardless of their backgrounds, culture, language, and individual capabilities, because I believe that as it is learner focused, the approach should consider and be equal to all the students regardless of anything. And for sure, if that happens, the learning experiences as well as the teaching process using the CLL in language teaching can be considered as a successful and progressive one. Right, so that's all on my part on the advantages and disadvantages of community language learning, as well as the implications of this approach to language teaching in the Philippines. I just hope you learned a lot from me, and see you in the question and answer portion. Thank you for listening. God bless and stay safe always.